Welcome to the PSI free public lecture series on equality, diversity and inclusion in education. And I'm going to introduce our panellists. And our first panelist is Padraig Danaher, who's a clinical specialist occupational therapist and psychological coach with over 14 years of experience supporting teenagers and adults through complex adversity and psychological challenges. Since 2011, Padraig has specialised in trauma and strengths-based approaches and attachment, guiding clients to reclaim meaning and purpose in their lives. As the founder of the OT Coach practice, Padraig leads a team of experienced occupational therapists delivering holistic interventions across the community and clinical settings. His approach is rooted in person-centered care, emphasizing connectedness, hope, identity, meaningful roles, and empowerment. And he's committed to creating a safe and supportive environment where clients feel truly understood, seen, and heard. Through evidence-based therapeutic strategies, Padraig facilitates adaptive occupational engagement, helping individuals navigate adverse experiences, restore their sense of self, and reconnect with their community. His goal is to foster resilience and hope, and to inspire clients and to live authentically and meaningfully. And I'm very aware of Padraig's work, and I suppose something that struck me was often when we think about young people who are struggling, we think about therapy in a very traditional sense, and actually, especially in relation to young people, sometimes what they want is the doing of it. How do you do things? And I know that I know many people who have benefited from Padraig's experience. And I certainly learned a lot about broadening my understanding of ways in which we can work with young people. And our second panelist is Marie Quilligan. And Anne-Marie holds a BA in social care and Masters in social work. She has worked as a community development worker with the Tipperary Rural Traveller Project and a community social worker with the Bedford Row Family Project in Limerick. She's an Irish traveller who works closely with people who experience inequality, trauma and social exclusion. Anne-Marie has researched hidden homelessness among Irish traveller women, the impact of secondary trauma among traveller staff who are working on the ground. She's also been a vocal advocate regarding experiences of traveller children in the education system. Via the Bedford Row Family Project, Anne-Marie has worked with traveller and non-traveller women and their families affected by imprisonment. Anne-Marie is passionate about improving wellbeing, understanding the impact of trauma and ensuring that marginalised voices are heard and respected. And my own name is Sharon Lambert. I'm a senior lecturer in applied psychology in University College Cork and currently president-elect of the Psychological Society of Ireland. I worked in the community with young people before I came to UCC, and my research in UCC really revolves around trauma, social exclusion, and how we can have systems and services, trauma-informed systems and services that can include people a bit more. So I'm going to start off by asking both of our panelists to tell us a little bit about their work and what it is that brought them to being passionate about EDI in education. So I might go to you first, Padraig.
Unmute there. Thanks for having me, Sharon. So my name is Padraig. I am an occupational therapist and I was an early school leaver myself. I'm neurodivergent, dyslexia and ADHD, and would come from a lower socioeconomic area, and school and education wasn't always prioritized. So I have a very personal interest in this, and much of my clinical practice at the moment is looking at young people who are struggling to attend school, many of them neurodivergent, autism, ADHD. Some have experienced complex trauma, and some of them are really struggling to attain education. So the work that I'm doing is supporting them, building their ability to cope with the environments, but also always looking at environmental changes that can be made within a school setting, and what environmental changes can be made at home, and how do we adapt the occupation, which is attendance at school, to support facilitation of. So I would say we've a huge increase of emotional based school anxiety at the moment. I work along lots of different organizations, and we're all singing the same hymn sheet and seeing something that I suppose it's got really bad over the last few years, and we're all trying to figure out how can we support young people to sustain and attain an education and have a sense of belonging and safety in that space.
Thanks, Padraig. And then Marie, if you'd like to.
Sorry, there's some people messaging me there to say they're in the waiting room. So I was trying to go into the chat there just to let you know. They're just asking there, has the
I think
discussion started?
yeah, everybody's in now, so
Or
just
they, yeah.
in the waiting room. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks a million for having me this evening, and I'm delighted. I'm actually very excited to hear about Padraig's work as well. I was saying it to Sharon during the week, as it sounds like a fabulous resource and support. But I suppose for myself, how I got into this work was so for I'm Irish traveller myself, and I suppose like growing up, when I look back now, I really grew up in a bubble, you know, and I was kind of wrapped up in cotton wool. So I didn't I worked in accounts and business and hospitality and stuff like that. So I never really thought about the experience of travellers in a societal capacity. You know, I just kind of understood it from my own family and from my own community locally. But during that time, anyway, while I was working in accounts, my grandfather and my grandmother got diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia at the same time. So I did a carers course in the evening to be able to learn how to support to keep them at home. The fear of God was in my grandfather; he was going to go into a nursing home. So I used to do that course in the evening, and then after a few years, my grandfather passed away, and I realized that I actually really enjoyed that kind of work, you know, the helping professional. So I decided to do a career change there about 10 years ago, and I went back to college to study to become a social care worker. And I suppose as well, like it's important to note, like I'm the first generation in my family as well in third level education. Now I had been in education, third level education prior to that, but I think we take for granted the social capital that comes with when you have previous members, you know, a mother or father or cousins and things like that that have gone through third level education. So even when I signed up for the social care course, I thought I was signing up for a social work course. I was about 4 months into the course before I realised the difference between social care work and social work. But anyway, in that undergrad, I did a placement. That's about 2016. I did a placement with a lady called Bridgie Casey from Limerick City. And she was working at the time with the Irish Traveller Movement. Now, initially, when I had gone back to third level education, I wanted to work with elderly people. But then when I did that placement with Bridgie, I was angry, and I suppose I was embarrassed as well, you know, that I didn't realize what was going on for an awful lot of people within my community, particularly the children. So initially, Bridgie really focused on accommodation. But I remember one day receiving a call from a lady, and she was explaining to me that an entire group of children in a halting site were attending school, had great attendance in primary school, early primary school, and yet none of the children could read or write. So their numeracy and their literacy was very poor. And I suppose when I look back in that now, I was thinking that can't be right, you know, like, and I thought the woman had it wrong, you know, or something like that. And I never really kind of looked at it very deep again. But while I was in third level, I did realize that there was a gap in resources and supports for travellers trying to enter education. So in that way, I kind of started mentoring travellers just through word of mouth. If they got stuck or anything like that with difficulties in third level education, I'd support them around that. But I suppose my baptismal of fire was when I went working for Bridgie Casey's sister, Mags Casey, in Tipperary. And I went, it was around the time of COVID, and my first response as a community development worker was to support the children that were sitting state exams. So that meant junior cert and leaving cert exams. And it came to my attention because they lived in extreme circumstances, hidden homelessness, no access to running water, no access to electricity, no access to proper toilets or anything like that. I was able to arrange a local community centre where mentors would go in, and the children were still able to be isolated from one another, and they could get tutoring and do their homework sessions. And I suppose when we did that, I realised that the children in junior cert and leaving cert could not read and write. So these children had gone the whole way through primary school to leaving cert without being able to read and write. And then I did a lot of work with Nuala Martin and Jack Griffin and Mags Casey around that. And what we found after that was that the majority, all of the traveller children actually in secondary school were on the reduced timetables unofficially. So that's how I kind of came into this line of work. And as we all know and understand, one of the biggest strengths of forces for resilience and mitigating factors for children is education. It's vital, and it's a human right as well as a child's right. So that's how I came into this work.
Thanks, Henry. And I know that I've attributed a quote to you in the past, which you have since told me is not actually your quote, but it was a poverty of expectation around some communities. So, and I know that there's a PhD student from applied psychology on the call, Kelly Buckley, and she did her research project last year on the experiences of working class students in universities, and similar to what you were describing in relation to traveller children was that there was an expectation that there are places they won't go and that there are things they won't do. And obviously we're not talking about, that's not everybody's experience, but actually it's too many children's experiences. My own experience of education as a working class person from a council estate was when I did in secondary school say that I wanted to do psychology. I was told that people like me don't go to college. So it would be really nice to think that that's, you know, an attitude that has changed. But unfortunately, I'm sure, Project, you can speak to that because you're working with children in school every day, is that there are still so many children and young people who feel that. And then, you know, the study that I just referenced that was done by Kelly Buckley about class in the classroom was that what she found across all of these working class students who were in university, they almost always go as mature students. They very rarely go straight after secondary school, but that their experiences from primary and secondary school carried with them in terms of that feeling that they didn't deserve to be there. And we all human beings tend to want to be really good human beings, but we all carry our own prejudice and bias, every single one of us. I have them as well. And sometimes we think that we're being helpful, but actually we're being unkind. And when we're talking about EDI, if you're not having really awkward conversations, if you haven't been made to feel uncomfortable in a conversation around equality, diversity, and inclusion, then you're not having a proper conversation because nobody knows everything. Nobody's an expert on it. I have said things that were not appropriate and did not know it, and I had to be corrected on it. So that's what I was thinking when you were talking there, and Maurice, about that poverty of expectation, and it carries on through adulthood as well. I was delivering a talk with a colleague who's a member of the traveller community, and she's a university education. Not that that matters, but I have to say that. And we both did our presentation, and somebody came up at the end of it, and they said to her, "Oh, you're so articulate." And I thought, she's the same age as me. We've both been to university. We both deliver a very similar talk all of the time. Nobody has ever come up to me at the end of a talk to tell me that I'm articulate. But yet here they are telling this educated adult woman that she is. And they did mean it as a compliment, but it isn't. It's actually a microaggression because there's an assumption that she won't be because she's a traveller. So, you know, you've touched there, both of you, on some of the challenges, and I might come to your project there. You know, I know that you're working with children every single day, you know, at all different ages, children and young people. You know, what would you say are maybe is it fair to ask you what are the top 3 challenges, you know, or even if you think about, you know, primary and post-primary, and maybe we can come back to higher education, then we can circle back to that in a minute.
There's loads that you said previous that I'd love to touch on as well.
If
Even
you
from
want to, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Just from a lower socioeconomic area, expectations for me was never to complete my leaving cert. The goal was always to get to my junior cert. That the cap was there. That was the marker of success. So I think for people who are coming from that, it's very difficult for them to see the idea of college because the words are never spoken about like that. There was never a cousin, an uncle, anyone within my family setting that had a third level education. So it was very difficult to even have that awareness that that could exist. And I think that's your starting point as well. It's that you really want the adults around you to believe that you can do anything. And through that, conversations have to happen. If they don't, and the expectation or the cap is there, the expectation was to do your junior cert, get a full-time job, done, box ticked. It was never. So I think it's really important to open that conversation. And I remember going to college, and when I was in college, they said we're all white middle class in this room, and it was occupational therapy in that course. And I said, I got to put my hand up. I'm not. I am not coming from that. And the sentence was, yeah, but you're a mature student, and it's the only reason you're here because a working class person wouldn't have got the points to get the course that you're in. You're in the medicine department. And they were right. I didn't complete my leaving cert. And that was sad to hear that I only had the ability to sit in that room because I had to go through the mature student and pass that marker of 600 points in the leaving cert. That was never, and that was the expectation they had of me in that space. So I think it's really important to note, like, when we're setting the bar low for people who are coming from a lower socioeconomic, it's very difficult for them to see past that. So that brings that interest in for me in this work context. What I'm seeing predominantly, a lot of who I'm working with at the moment from a lower socioeconomic area, it's the ability to it's again, it's low expectations of what education is. It's what's the point? Is it something to keep them busy for a few hours? There's a lack of kind of connection, I would say, for some people to say it's something we should do. And then from the middle class area, many of them are neurodivergent and they are in an environment that does not meet their needs. When like it is an environment that's designed for neurotypical. I am dyslexic and I have ADHD. That means I have an inability to hold attention to things I'm not interested in, which is pretty much every subject in school. And I'm dyslexic and I'm judged on my ability to read and write and express myself through written words. So I think it's not an environment that where we flourish. And I meet these incredibly high achievers, perfectionists, autistic, young, I would say young adults now at the moment of a good few, and many of them young women who can achieve so much, but the environment isn't conducive with that. They are really incredible, but the environment from a sensory perspective is so overwhelming. The noise, the social expectations, the pressure that's put upon their bodies is above what their capacity is to hold. So they are under huge level of distress. And I would say we're seeing that emotional based school anxiety or avoidance huge. But I think it's difficult because I'm such an advocate for education. I just wish there was some amendments and some changes that we could make in systems that allowed that ability of prioritizing wellness, prioritizing their well-being and their basic needs and their sensory needs as best they possibly could. But that's, I would say, predominantly it's neurodivergent young people that are burnt out from school. They've persevered and pushed through, and they can't do it anymore. That's huge in at the moment. Yeah.
And I think as well, like it's very important that we say that we also have teachers who are burnt out because they are operating in the system that is outputs based, and university is the same. So there are departments somewhere who say this is what you must achieve and this is how we measure achievement. But the achievement is, as you said, probably for a neurotypical child who's, not culturally or ethnically diverse and who is from a particular socioeconomic status. And there are lots of young people who go to school and they have a great time and they enjoy it and they do really well and they go down that pathway. And then you have teachers who have this other group of children who they want to support, but the system wants them to produce these outputs. And you see that in universities as well. It's that kind of neoliberal model of education. So, Anne-Marie, like for you then, the same question, what are the challenges that are, I'm thinking about, you've worked with cohorts of young people that are similar to Padraig in that they're experiencing multiple different challenges, and what are the kind of the top challenges you were seeing with that cohort in terms of access to primary and post-primary education?
I think kind of for me something that always came up. So and I think it's so important to recognize as well, that teachers are working in an environment as well that's under-resourced, and classroom sizes are bigger, and traumas that are presenting in the classroom are different as well. Particularly, like we've children from war-torn countries, we've children experiencing racism, xenophobia, and that's aside from domestic violence and hidden homelessness and stuff like that. So teachers are nearly expected, there's so much asked of them now than what would have been traditionally expected in a classroom setting. And so teachers are at risk, I suppose, as well of experiencing burnout. And I recognize as well, like in my role, like when I'm working with children, I'm not working with 20 or 30 children at one time. So I'm in a position where I'm meeting them maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, and I'm able to build that relationship with them, and I'm able to build that trust, and it's slower and it's more playful as well, because that's really important for children. And it's not as structured as in the classroom setting. But what I find this heartbreaking, whether the child be traveller or non-traveller, but for any child to be coming back saying, Emery, my teacher doesn't like me, for a child, because like, if we think about it, if we as adults are going into our job and we have a supervisor that we think doesn't like us, we work differently, don't we? So it's the relationship side of it. And sometimes when we talk about racism, and when it's historic and there might be trauma from racism there with the parents as well, and sometimes that can be brushed off on the child, transference, counter transference. And so the racism can be real or perceived experiences, but it still hits the same, so when I hear children saying that my teacher doesn't like me is heartbreaking. And whether the teacher does or does not like the child is not the important piece per se, but it's that's what the child feels, and they are children. So that was a very common theme. And I suppose there's a research report out there as well by Dr. Marie Quilligan, and I think the quotes from the children in that research report are very poignant. So the research report, if anyone wanted to read it, is called Out of the Shadows. And like that as well, she captures in the research that children are reporting feeling unwanted, both in school and by the settled community as an entirety. Children feeling ignored by their teachers. When they're asked in, what does that feel like, that you're being ignored by your teacher, the children said, not being asked to do homework or being given different homework or more simpler homework than other children. So for me, that's a big challenge. And then there is the challenge as well, like where you're trying to encourage parents to put the children to help improve the child's attendance. But when you have a parent then with a child that's struggling emotionally and mentally to go into the classroom, on paper, I know we're saying, well, if it was my child, I'd send them in. But when you're talking about a child's mental health, it's a big ask. And sometimes, the reality is travellers have and still do experience an awful lot of racism in Ireland. It's systemic. The statistics are out there, and the research reports are out there to say like over 80% of employers would not hire a traveller. Over 80% of people would not like to have a traveller as a member of their family. So some of these people are teachers. And some are social workers, some are guards, and that's just the reality, of the society that we live in, and the children feel that. And it is hard to encourage a parent that has been traumatized by the education system to then put their children into the education system when they didn't see the benefit of it. So that's a challenge, to build those relationships of trust. And I suppose that's a huge part of trauma-informed practice, isn't it? For trust and safety on both sides, I suppose, emotionally.
I know, Anne Marie, when I think about my friends who are members of the community and their children, and I think about my experiences of education, which weren't necessarily positive, but they were nothing compared to the experiences of people I know who are travellers. And I've often said this, and I'd say, putting my hand on my heart, if I was a member of the travelling community and my children were travellers, I don't know that I would be able to send them to school, because I would be absolutely terrified about what the experience would be. So as a settled person, I frequently hear anti-traveller talk in all sorts of spaces, including in professional spaces. I sometimes hear children, my own children might come home and they might say the particular word that is derogatory about the community has been used by other children in school. And I do genuinely think, and I do, sometimes, schools have said to me it's very difficult to engage sometimes with the parents, and they don't want to come in. And I think that when we frame it like that, we're not really understanding. It's not that they don't want to come in, they can't come in, because it's traumatizing to go into a school. So if you want to meet somebody from a community who's experienced trauma in an educational setting, you have to meet them outside of the school, actually. And ask yourself, if your children were travellers, would you send them to your school? Would you send them to your service if you're a psychologist? So, that's when I talk about having difficult, challenging conversations, and they're the kind of conversations that we have to have when we're talking about EDI. Padraig, you spoke there about kind of the environment and the setting, and how exhausting that can be for lots of different children, particularly neurodivergent children. And I can think myself of a couple of examples over the last couple of years of barriers for young people. So, a child, for example, who's a wheelchair user, and the school tour is to a place that's not wheelchair accessible. And the response to that is, why is everybody in the class being punished? So this is something that happened in the last couple of years. So I'm not talking about 20 years ago, I'm talking about in the last couple of years, adjusting something so that all children or young people can participate is not punishing others. It's just adjusting something. One of the things that comes up a lot, actually, and it's something I talk about a bit, is about uniform policies. And I understand the importance of uniform policies. What I don't always understand is how they're executed. So things that are punishment and shame, and thinking about a family a few years ago where there was domestic violence in their home and nobody knew it because it was a secret. And those children used to have to leave the house at night time, and they would take whatever little bits they could, because there was a chance that they wouldn't be coming back at night because they might have to sleep outside in the shed, and they'd go directly to school. And sometimes they might miss bits of their uniform, and then they arrive into school and they don't have all of that uniform, and they experience punishment and shame. And they can't go home and talk about that, because then they're bringing trouble home, which is increasing the risk of domestic violence at home. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men in Ireland will experience domestic violence, and it's not something that happens in one particular socioeconomic status or one particular ethnic group. We really don't know all the time what young people are experiencing. So we can have a uniform policy, but instead of punishing somebody, what we can say is, I have a box of ties in my uniform, in my office. I want to give you one because it's important that you wear it today. And then the uniform policy is adhered to, while accepting that there are some young people who are turning up at our door, and that we may not know the challenges that they're experiencing. So that was one of the barriers I was thinking about as you were speaking as well. So Padraig, was there something you wanted to come back in on there before I move on to the next question?
I think even just talking about the uniforms for a moment, from a sensory perspective for a young person who is struggling, and it's so overwhelming for them to put on the clothes, and that's all they can think about. It's like wearing a uniform of sandpaper, and that we are persistent in that. If the end goal for us is facilitating education, how can we be as creative as possible? And if that young person needs to come in and whatever clothes feels good for them, and they can sit there and have the ability to access their prefrontal cortex because they are somewhat regulated and they can hear the information, I think that should be the end goal. If the outcome is education, I think and for to support a young person with education, we should be creative. And inclusion isn't a punishment for anybody. It's a lovely space to even movement breaks. Many of the teenagers that I'm working with, they will refuse to engage in supports because it's seen as different. And autism is seen as a negative or a dirty word for within among their peer group. So they're afraid to even accept the supports. I had one young person, they wouldn't wear glasses. They needed glasses, refused to wear them because no one else in the class was wearing glasses. So they're so fearful of even accepting some of that supports. And I think inclusion should be creating movement, creating creativity for all. It doesn't have to be they need the movement break. Why aren't we all moving our body in school? Like it'll benefit everybody, and accepting and embracing the diversity that's in the class. That should be celebrated each day, not seen as these need extra. We all do. This is us. This is us collectively as a class.
Mm.
I think I'd love to see movement towards that, and to know that even as Anne Marie was speaking as well, I'm very privileged with the job that I get to do because I get to do one-on-one. I get to do meaningful, playful, engaging sessions with my clients. It's fab. Like it's amazing. Teachers have to hold a space of 30 students and supporting them around developing an education with 30 very different needs, very different spaces in their life, and it's 6 or 7 hours. It is tough. So my hat goes off to all the teachers that are doing incredible work and being really creative. I've worked in lots of schools where many of those teachers will bring in extra food because they know some of those kids aren't eating, and they are bringing in pens, and there's a subtlety to their kindness. It's not loud. They need this, and it's put on their desk. So there is some fantastic work, and I think for those teachers to be celebrated as they're the marker, that's who we need to be celebrating and saying, like, this is what can be done. There's beautiful things happening in schools. Let's talk about them and seeing if we can enhance them.
100%. And one of the things, you mentioned there, and I'm conscious that it's a public lecture series and there are lots of different people here with lots of different various backgrounds. And you talked about that prefrontal cortex. Um, and there may be people who join the call who haven't got a background in psychology or education. They might come from a different sector. They may be a parent. Um, so that part of the brain, which is the front part of your brain, is the thinking brain. And in order for you to be able to think and to be able to learn, you actually have to be relaxed and happy. And we all know that when we are stressed, we become more forgetful, and you're walking around and you're looking for your keys and you don't know where something is. And when you're stressed, all of those things. So when children arrive in the morning time, if the first interaction is it's a negative interaction about a uniform, for example, then that immediately sets them up to not being in a good space for learning. And then if they're experiencing other challenges, and you touched on some of them, like sensory around uniform, noise, lighting, movement, then you set the whole day up. It's almost like a domino effect of how all of the different stressors means that part of the brain that's required for learning is just really stressed, and it's not, and it's gone offline. There was something you said there as well, which I thought was interesting, was around inclusion. So what does inclusion mean? Does it mean that somebody is made to look different? And I was thinking recently about a young person who is autistic, and they are in a mainstream school, and the, when you're an adolescent, peer relationships are the most important thing. That's part of adolescent development. And they don't want to, some of their closer friends know that they're autistic, but they don't necessarily want, that to be something that they're walking around. And what the system in that particular setting is if the student wants to leave the room, they have a card that they can show to the teacher so that they can leave. They've said they're not going to use it, because to use that card means that they're saying, I'm different in the class. So you're right, that's not inclusion. That's saying, oh, you're here. That does it, so you're included, but actually, because the system is going to make you look different, we're actually going to exclude you. So that's and I think that they are things that are done from a genuine space of wanting to do something helpful, and perhaps then not having the space and the time and the resources to be able to sit down and say, who does this work for and how is it working? So we've talked a bit about primary school and post-primary, and I would like to spend just a couple of minutes talking about, and I think it is important. So often I go to events about, because I work in a university.
Volume is gone.
Is it? No, I don't think so. So often when we, in universities and you have EDI events and they talk about, equality, diversity and inclusion in university, we're talking about it too late when we're talking about it in university, because we have to start talking about it in primary school. And you've both spoken to that about the challenges coming up along. Simple things which seem simple when you're in a university, but they're not if you're outside of the system. So, not knowing what a module is, not knowing that you've applied to the wrong course, not understanding the different words. I was the first in my family to go to university, and I think about when I went and how frightening it was and not understanding anything that was going on in comparison when I think about my own children who's absolutely imagined that they're going to be going to university because their life revolves around it because their mother works there. And when I think about equality, and people say, we have free education, and we do, and that all children can go to school and they all get the same opportunities, and it's not true. Because and I give this example, this story. I dropped one of my children to a music class, and it's a primary school, and there was loads of teenagers there. It was in the evening time, and I was like, oh, why are they all here? And I asked one of them, I said, oh, what's going on in the school? And they said, oh, because it was the first week of September. And they said, oh, we're in leaving cert. And the maths teacher isn't great, so everybody is getting maths grinds. And I said, but it's only the first week of September, like the leaving cert stage is week. And they said, oh yeah, no, we always start now. And they said, and everybody does it because everybody knows that maths teacher isn't great. And I thought, well, that's not true that everybody does it, because it's only the people who can afford to get grinds who are doing it. So if you're parenting alone, if you are a parent of a child who has a disability, it's very expensive. If you're experiencing any other financial difficulties, lots of people are experiencing financial difficulties now with the cost of living crisis. So in lots of ways, it isn't equal. Education isn't equal. And Padraig, you talked earlier about, somebody not being able to get 500 points in their leaving cert. How many students can get 500 points in their leaving cert if we took away private grinds? What would be, how many would be left after that? So that moves us on to thinking about then, when people do come to university, what is that like? What is it like, EDI in university? I suppose just to say one thing, I think that there's more diversity in the teaching staff in a university. So you're much more likely to see people who are Black and brown, from other ethnic minority groups. There are a couple of travellers who work in higher education, not as many as there should be. There are working class individuals in universities. Some of them don't identify as working class because they struggle to fit in the university. But you certainly have more diversity, I think, in the teaching staff at third level than you do perhaps in primary and secondary. Well, it is changing at those levels too. But there are still a lot of struggles for students in terms of EDI in third level, and I'd like to hear your input on that.
would you want to go, Emery? I think even accessing the services is the difficult part. It's the being able to advocate for yourself with some of those services. So me reaching out to access services, the disability services within a university, they're not always available, and you have to then advocate and send the email again, or even knowing the person of to ask, or the shame around asking, the shame around feeling like you shouldn't be in the place in the first place, not to be asking for supports. I think is really hard. It is interesting to see the diversity of lecturers in there, even from the LGBTQ community, and being able to advocate that space. There's a shift for sure. Um, but I think for many of the challenges that I see from lots, whether you are a wheelchair user, whether you're part of the queer community, there's still stigma. There's still a, they're just not designed. They're not universally designed. Even some of the ones with the occupational therapy department, there still could do with some openness with that. And we should be in there leading that space. So I think sometimes we need to really look at a universal design. Does this facilitate everyone that's coming through the door? Is it open to everybody? So I think we have a lot, and I know some of the buildings are old as well. I know that is a somewhat of a barrier, but I think that would, yeah, that would be amazing to celebrate that.
And I know you said there about some of the buildings being a barrier. And one thing that struck me about lockdown was events that were being held online, and how that it did increase access, and it increased access for lots of different groups. So people who are parenting alone and who have other caring responsibilities, disabled people, people who kind of struggle with sensory stuff. And I've noticed that since, and then, it was hybrid, so people because some people love being in person, and that's fantastic. But something that has kind of slipped actually is the fact that it's the hybrid is gone now. Even in terms for staff, if there's a talk for staff and you say that looks great, but it's on at 8 o'clock in the evening, and the person might have caring responsibilities, and is it hybrid? No, it's in person. So there are barriers with buildings, but actually, there are still ways that we can overcome that. I know, Anne-Marie, you've looked at kind of experiences of you've been in two different campuses, and you've spoken to lots of different people in terms of supporting them to go to university as well. So I wonder what your thoughts are around EDI in third level.
Um, so I suppose I was talking to somebody about this today. So I've studied four different courses in college. So I'm like a boomerang. I keep going back. So like I'm looking over the course of 25 years, like I'm in and out of college. And I suppose just before I move on to university, to say, since I kind of started doing this work, I've spoken to three teachers that are traveller but don't publicly identify as traveller. And that's in secondary school. So I suppose when we're talking about inclusion and diversity, I'm not sure how inclusive and schools are for staff, let alone for students. Not all schools, like obviously, but it's a bit of a concern that these teachers don't feel safe enough to publicly identify. So I never had a traveller teacher. I never had a traveller lecturer until one time I was in LIT and Dr. Hannah McGinley was invited in to speak. And what is it? I was about 35, I suppose. And I was obviously very excited to hear her speak, like, because I followed her work and always admired her work. She's a phenomenal academic. But I got very emotional in the lecture. It was hitting me that this was my first time ever, seeing a traveller teaching. I've never shared outside of secondary school. I've never shared a classroom with another traveller student. So I've always kind of been the only traveller and just accepted that kind of as my norm. I never really thought very much about it. So I found it I was taken back by how over emotional I got at that experience. So if I felt that way as an adult, I wonder what would be the impact for other younger students and the like if they had representation in teaching staff. So Hannah was just there now as a guest lecturer. I don't want to overstate it. Like, I've never had a traveller lecture. I would have loved to have a traveller lecture. You know, it would have meant an awful lot, and I just feel my experiences would have been different. But I suppose what I will say is, whenever you hear me talk, I have a huge bias for the Technological University of Shannon, or formerly known as Limerick Institute of Technology. Do you know, that's a place that I flourished. It's my home. Is sometimes if I still get dysregulated, I go over there for a coffee on my own. I love it. I just love it over there. So, but that was really down to I had phenomenal lectures, and the access staff were amazing. And you know, there was Anna Murphy. I'm not going to be citing everyone now, but Dr. Caroline Begary as well worked in the access, and they went out of their comfort zone. They went off the campus. They came into the communities, and I did some lovely, along with TRTP, collaborative pieces of work through LIT with traveller children in Tipperary. Obviously, I didn't do it on my own. I did that with the support and the guidance of Nuala Martin, who's an education worker that worked with us, and a teacher, Jack Griffin, a social worker, and Mags Casey. But what we did in collaboration with Limerick Institute of Technology is they came out, so staff from LIT came out to help us run groups because we were under-resourced staff-wise. So they got to know the children. And then we knew that the children's numeracy and literacy skills were very poor. So we still brought them into the campus, and they did a full day in the culinary arts part of the college. I had studied there as well. And so we were showing the children that, okay, you might not get the traditional Leaving Cert, but there's alternative routes into education. They also did a piece with Francesca Hutchinson, who was a graduate as well of LIT, and she's a teacher now as well, an art teacher. And we did workshops with her around identity with the children. And then the children launched their art exhibition on the campus of LIT, and the parents and grandparents were invited in. And with that then as well, there was the mayor of Limerick City and the academic staff, you know, the lecturers. So it was building that relationship and letting the children know, like, this is your college, this is where you belong. These are the lecturers. They knew them, they had that relationship with them, with the access staff, but not just the children, their parents and their grandparents as well. You know, so it really was, so, and as well, I do have to say UCC do brilliant work as well. They're
I
very
was
engaged.
waiting for you to say something there
Oh
about
yeah.
UCC, Emery.
But you know, no, in fairness now, with the Traveller Visibility Group, and I'm Cork, down in Cork, and the access do come in as well, in and meet monthly with the Traveller Visibility group in Cork, and they have had art exhibitions and things like that there as well. So you know, like, these are very positive things that are happening. But I suppose the other side of it is the reality. I also worked with a young woman that was in third level education. Now she came in, traveller woman, traveller girl. She came in from the Leaving Cert, but she was did not want to avail of the access services because she was embarrassed, because she didn't want anyone to know that she was traveller, and she didn't pass her exams. So what she did was she got a loan out. Sure, I can hardly handle, well, I can manage loans now, I'm at that age, but at her age now, I wouldn't have been able to do. But you can imagine a young person, you know, like, getting a loan out, because she didn't want to put that financial pressure on her parents, you know, to have to pay to repeat the exams. So she was working practically a full-time job. She was holding all this to herself. And I suppose how it came out in was that she was actually self-harming. So, and she was, oh God, sorry no, but she was cutting herself because she found college hard enough, as she didn't want an extra label. but the college, and then it was again building up that trust and relationship with her, and not and understanding where she's coming from, and letting her know, these resources are there. Nobody is going to know that you're availing of them. There's the confidentiality piece, and the colleges, like the staff are so. I suppose for me, that experience was trauma informed as well, with the staff in the college and stuff like that, and being able to meet her where she's at. So it's not easy. It can be challenging, but it can be very rewarding as well, and it can change lives. And the thing about it is, she now works, she's very open about her identity. She never hid it before college, because everyone knew who she was at home and within her community, but just in that institution. And as you say, sometimes we feel like we don't belong, and we internalize that, and again, that kind of comes back to that poverty of expectation, as well as a huge burden to put on a child. So for me, I still think the academic sector are not diverse enough, but with regards to traveller students, there are improvements, but it is coming at a mature level student stage. And I feel traveller children are being robbed of their opportunity in education and robbed of years of their lives to have to go back as a mature student.
Yeah, and really, like, you're talking there about the not feeling like you belong, and it is, and I've had students who will come to me and tell me that they are a member of the traveller community, but nobody in their class knows.
Yeah.
And they don't go to social events because they're afraid if they go to a social event that somebody will say something anti-traveller. They've heard things, at all levels of their education from teachers and lecturers, that, would certainly be considered to be, racism and discrimination. And you see it as well, like and you talked there, about the different, and not wanting to use the services that are available, because if you feel like you're not good enough, and your whole life you felt like you're good enough, not good enough, if you then go and use these services that are there for you, it's almost proof that you're not good enough, because you're supposed to not take those services. You're supposed to be even better than everybody else. You have to work even harder than everybody else to prove your space there. And something that struck me a couple of years ago when I started working in the university was, sometimes I'm contacted by an individual who works in the community, and he supports people who are coming out of prison and coming back into the community. And lots of them have had an opportunity to participate in education in the prison setting, and it's opened a lot of doors to them. And they think about, what would I like to do next? And they'll say, will you meet this person? They're interested in, whatever it is, that the particular courses. And I say, of course, and I'll contact them, and I'll offer to meet them. In the beginning, I used to offer to meet them in the university, and they would always say no. They'd never want to come through the gates of the university because they feel like they don't belong. So I have to meet them out in the community somewhere for a cup of coffee a couple of times, and then we come into the university. And on more than one occasion, we'll be walking through the campus of the university, and they'll say, everybody's looking at me because they know I don't belong here. And nobody is actually, because most people are actually wrapped up in themselves. But they feel it, so it's not just if you build it, they will come. And I think that's what I really heard there, is what you were saying. It's not just if you build it, they will come. It's more than that. You have to go out and hold them so that you can bring them in.
Yeah.
Did you want to come in there, Padraig?
Yeah, a lot of the young people that I would work with, it's actually doing exposure therapy to what the grounds of a university might look like. Like, it's this grandeur building that, like, is inaccessible. Like, oh, I should never belong. So most of our therapeutic interventions, if the idea was that they could go, it's sitting on having lunch inside university. It's breaking down that this mysterious place that I don't have access to, that I because they will have never have entered there with a cousin or an uncle because they haven't been. So I think for us to be looking at that and trying to say if that is a barrier, if an environmental factor, them feeling safe in such an unfamiliar, like how do we break that down? And that's repeated. That's literally going to the gates and meeting them. It might be having a coffee with them outside until they feel regulated enough with you, and then you're the person then that brings them back in so that they can regulate in that space. But like that is a very real barrier for a lot of young teenagers and young adults that I'm working with. It's the fear of what's and it is like coming into the grounds of the UCC. It's like what it's like Harry Potter. It's like this like what is this space? So I think breaking down as many of those environmental factors and I think exposing them to that, like this is just where people come. It's like and yeah, supporting them in that space, but using ourselves to regulate them while they're going through that space.
And I think when you get them in there, there's something that has to have, not always, but it's really good if this has happened at an earlier age that then allows them to stay, which is planting the seeds that you sow that you often don't get a reward for. So if you're somebody here who's a parent or somebody who's a professional who's working with young people, in order to be old and wise, first you have to be young and foolish. So sometimes there are things that we say to young people that they cannot take on board right now because A, they don't believe it in themselves right now because there's too many other things going on, or their struggles are too big that they can't believe it about themselves. So you might be giving somebody lots of praise and positive encouragement, but you may not reap the rewards of the seeds that you sow. And I think about my own journey into education. And when I went into, it was when you were describing there about how scary the university is. And that was my experience going into the university, finding it to be a very frightening place. And I wanted to leave. I wanted to drop out. Within 2 months, I wanted to drop out. I didn't feel like I belonged. And I was really lucky because my mother always told me that I was really bright and that I could, achieve anything that I wanted to. And I also, and you see, sometimes you need more than just the parents saying it too, because of course they always, they often say very nice things about you. Sometimes you need somebody else outside of that as well. So I was also very lucky that I had a principal in secondary school who, despite the fact that I sometimes wasn't very nice to him, would always tell me that I was very, very bright and I would be great if I went to university. And he would never have seen the rewards of the seeds that he was sowing because I did not believe that to be true of myself at the time. And there were lots of other people in the system who didn't believe it to be true either. And when in those moments when I wanted to seriously drop out, I had words in my head that my mother had said to me when I was a teenager, but also words in my head that he as a principal had said to me when I was a teenager. So it's that piece of what happens in primary, and primary can be a really nice, beautiful space for lots of children. The transition to secondary school can be very, very difficult, and often we see many problems there. And then, they leave, or they do stay, and some people would prefer if they left. And then when they do go to university, so there's pieces that matter at every one of those stages, that when the time comes that that person is in a position to do that, to say, right, I'm ready to do this, that there's bits from that whole journey. But the people at the earlier stages of the journey might not get to see kind of the rewards. And that can be difficult if you're a professional working with young people and you feel like you're banging your head off the door and you're saying the same thing all the time and you think it's not going in. And I remember examining a PhD a number of years ago where a PhD student had looked at people who had desisted from crime, so people who'd been involved in lots of criminal offending, and then they decided they were going to stop. What was common through all the interviews that this PhD student did was, for all of the people, they had reached a point where their mental health and their addiction had been bad, and they had been involved in criminal behavior, and they reached a point where they wanted life to be different and to be better and to be easier. And in every single interview, what you saw was every single one of them remembered one adult at some point, usually in their adolescence, that said something about them that was really positive and nice that they didn't believe about themselves at the time. They didn't even always remember the name of the person. He was like a teacher or it was a youth worker. But they remembered a sentence that was said about them, and they thought at this, 10 years later, and they go, maybe that's true. And that was the bit that allowed them then to take that next leap. So so there's some questions have already come in there. And so I'm going to get to them in about 5 minutes. So if anybody else wants to put in your questions, you need if you pop them in there now. And I'm going to just ask you maybe to talk about some of the solutions that people are putting in place that you do see that are working and that are supporting young, whether it's a primary, post-primary, or higher level education.
I suppose, Sharon, if I could just say, I'm not sure how many, I think there's a few teachers and things like that in the audience, but I know when it comes to the work, and sometimes, we can have behaviours in classrooms that are difficult to manage and things like that. So like to be trauma informed, like we're not saying that it's like lack of consequences or anything like that, or encouraging bad behaviour to happen. And very much so, children really appreciate boundaries because it gives them a sense of safety. And if you're honest and able to explain things to them, like this is why the rule is this way, let's say, whatever, what I have found. But I suppose just to say to teachers, because I have a few friends that I lived with a teacher, and like she worked so many hours outside of the school hours. She always worked on the weekends. She was always trying to think outside the box. And I say, like, and all that was unpaid work as well, and like when things get difficult, to realize, like, don't do it on your own. Don't try to do it on your own, because a lot of the time, if there's something coming up for a child in the classroom, most likely there might be something happening at home. And I know when I worked in community development, I always I always really appreciated when teachers reached out to us, as opposed to us having to go into the school to approach the teachers, because so like you will have community development workers out there ready to support, their traveller specific organisations or family resource organisations. We do have the likes of education welfare officers, I'm after forgetting the other name of the education support workers. I forgot the name of that group in the school, but I've received an awful lot of support for them in relation to help supporting children around absenteeism and around building that relationship with the family and the school as well. But at present, there's an initiative being rolled out, and it's being rolled out under the Traveller Education and Roma strategy. And there is a young traveller woman, her name is Megan Berry, and so she's employed in that as well. She's kind of overseeing it. So it's a 6-year strategy, and they're getting ready to launch their website soon. And basically, teachers or parents or other professionals will be able to be able to access targeted information around resources, tools for the parents, tools for the child, tools for the teachers. And they also are employing 15 community link workers as well. So like it's just for their target population is primary and post primary school, but just for a teacher not to be able to not to feel that they have to hold all of this on their own, because it can be a lot at times, and it's not always easy. But that is an initiative that's running, and then we do have letting children know, like, that there are things like the 1916 bursary fund, which is a scholarship, because sometimes people think, well, I can't go to university, I can't pay for accommodation, I can't pay for fees, or they mightn't realise that they might be able to apply for a SUSI grant and things like that. So there are a lot of resources and things like that that are there. But lads, it's if anyone can think of it in the chat, I've the education welfare officer at the forefront of my head, but there's another support for education support workers that work in the community and link in with the schools as well, particularly DEIS schools, and they do phenomenal work. And I'm so embarrassed that I'm after forgetting the name of their profession, because the teachers here will know anyway, but they really are a very valuable link for the children and for us as professionals to link into the school. So it really is about collaboration. Yeah.
Thanks, Henry. And if that comes back into your head and you want to get it in,
Yeah,
just for,
yeah.
yeah, you just
And
shout it out, no bother. Um, what about yourself, Padraig?
Mm. Okay. Yeah, I think from a capacity of what parents could do as well to support their kids who are struggling with school. I think for us to just prioritize rest at times, working with a lot of kids are really highly anxious, a lot of teens, and I think we undervalue the space where we might need to pull back for a little while and support rest, support connection within a school setting as well. Even speaking about the power that teachers have with one sentence that they can say. Um, for me, there was a one lady, one good adult, and I remember a sentence that she said, and it's how she made me feel that I could do so much more than I ever could. And it sat with me about 10 years later. And I was like, maybe I could go to college. And it was just a sentence she said, teachers have this in their power and they are incredible. We've all experienced one who we adored, made us feel safe, made us feel connected. And it's sentences, but more so authentic sentences. If you see something positive in that person, tell them, allow that to flourish. I I don't think you understand the power that is in your words, but more so the authenticness of it. If you don't believe it, please don't say it. If it's disingenuous, please don't say it. But if you feel it and you see something positive in somebody and you believe that it could be something great, say it to them. There's a huge power in that. So really interesting to hear about that research because I see it and I've looked at all the research in when it comes to the one good adult and the power of that and seeing that positive outcome, particularly young people who've experienced trauma at home. We're all hungry to know that there is hope and that we can achieve. And I think if we can say it to people when we really see it, please say it loudly and as much as possible.
Thanks, Frederick. And when you were saying there about, saying something positive to a young person, I remember somebody said years ago, and I try to remember this, catch them being good. Because we often, when we're tired as well, we just catch them doing the stuff. And I mean, as a parent myself, I could be guilty of that if I'm tired and I come home and the place is a mess and I see everything that's wrong. And I remember years ago, I had, and sometimes you just miss things. Like years ago, I had spent a weekend painting my children's bedroom, a May bank holiday weekend, and it was sunny. And remember kind of thinking, oh, I could be outside, but here I am doing this. And I was all delighted and it was going to be a surprise. And then I was working late the following night. And when I came home, the kids were already gone to bed. They were just, getting into bed. And I came down, and the youngest child had drawn massive scrawls on every single wall in the room. And I remember thinking, I spent the whole weekend painting that room and I got really cross and I was given out. And she came to me then. I actually even just walked out. I was just so annoyed and I walked out and I went back down and I was too cross and I went back down and I said, look, I was too cross and I shouldn't have. And, this is why this is why I was annoyed because, and she said, but what I didn't see when I looked, because all I saw was scrawls all over my lovely new paintwork. And she said to me, but I've drawn my family. And if I have a bad dream in the nighttime, when I wake up, you're all there. And it doesn't matter about the wall, you know. But I often there's loads of things I've done as a parent that I feel guilty about, and that's one of them. Is that in that moment I was unable to, because I was tired and I was irritated and I came home and that was something, the straw that broke the camel's back. And I didn't imagine what the world looked like for that child. Um, and there are different stages, where children do become a little bit more nervous at night time, because they become more aware of things like Halloween and things like that. So it's that catching them being good because it's very easy to catch them doing things when they're not being good. And I don't mean actually I hate them when they're not being good, but when they're doing things that might be adventurous, is another way of looking at it. And the thing about the one good adult, I think if we think, and the focus of this section, of course, is about solutions, is if you are that one good adult, it can be really exhausting, really, really exhausting, because we can't pretend that we're not managing a situation now where the demands are outweighing the resources. So, and when you talked about children in homelessness earlier, very long waiting lists for mental health services and disability services. And people are really stretched financially. The grants that were available to me when I went to college as a mature student no longer exist. If I was starting again in the morning, I would not be going to college because I wouldn't be able to go, and I think that's such a shame that we are locking out an awful lot of people out of education who would have so much to give. So for that one good adult, if you are it in terms of solutions, is also about minding themselves, of course, and trying to not get into burnout so that you are able to stay being that one good adult. So systems and services need to recognize that the increasing challenges that we're seeing in young people are also impacting on staff. And the staff who care the most are the ones who are most affected. So one of the ways that we can help them is by having, and I know, Emery, you might want to come in on this, is about reflective practice, and I know, Padraig, this is something you're very strong on as well. So would you just maybe talk for a minute or two there about reflective practice as a way of minding ourselves and systems?
Yeah, I suppose I had to learn that. I've been doing it now or studying it, I suppose, for about 10 years. But when I first started learning about reflective practice and journaling and stuff, oh my God, I hated it. I just thought, what a load of, and I could not get into it. And I just remember I had a lecturer and a supervisor called Neil Whelan. And my God, did that man earn his money with me? I just thought it was all kumbaya and what is this shit? I can't be. I knew nothing about being trauma informed. But then, as I kind of was going along, it really started to resonate with me, and I started to realize, I suppose, stuff that had happened to me as a child, positive things, maybe not so positive things, as a child, maybe as a teenager, as an adult, and stuff like that, was actually impacting and shaping how I was making decisions, my boundaries, and all these things are very important when it comes to burnout and things like that. And sometimes as we all know, we all have unconscious bias, we're all human and stuff like that. And I suppose I really learned, like, from Neil, is a very beneficial thing to do, like, is reflective practice, because sometimes you look back and you think, well, why did I make that decision? Why did I make that decision about this person, and not that person? And that sometimes children can be very annoying. Did you know sometimes I worked with a child one time and I swear to, oh my God, I used to be on my last nerve and I was mad about him, but I would come out and I'd be dysregulated. So if I'm dysregulated, how can he be regulated? Like, I couldn't help him to co-regulate unless I was able to regulate myself. But I was, like, very fortunate that I had supervision. I had work colleagues and stuff like that to be able to talk to, and to be able to explore that. So I suppose it's like being honest with yourself first and foremost. Sometimes we do make decisions, and just like that, the work can get so busy, we don't allow ourselves time to think. And maybe sometimes with time to think, we might start feel a bit guilty, and I suppose for me, particularly in relation to traveller children in school, it's not just me saying it, like, the research is documenting it. Children are coming out of school thinking that their teachers don't like them. Yeah, that's not okay. We have research that shows us, that there's a lot of anti-traveller racism in this country. It would be naive of us to think that we're not carrying that into our professional practice, you know. Um, so it does do an awful lot of damage. It does do an awful lot of harm. And I know nobody goes into a helping profession with that. I know it wouldn't sit right with any teacher or any other professional if they thought a child was lying awake at night thinking this about them or carrying those feelings. So I suppose if we have reflective practice, um, it's always very good if something goes well for me at work, and I used to always wreck my colleagues' heads about this. If something went well, I've said, that's great, this happened. But if something goes wrong, and just say, well, what did we do? What could we have done different? Because we do make mistakes, and we're human. It's okay to make mistakes. But what's not okay is to put that blame back on the child. It is not the children's fault that they are coming out of school not being able to read and write. And we cannot be complacent and find ourselves in a position where children are spending 10 to 12 years in education and they can't read or write their names. And for it, that really is about a human right and a dignity piece, irrespective of third level education. These children someday in their future are going to have to take medication. That is very dangerous if they don't know how to read and write. If they have to administer medication to themselves, to their children or a family member, it is a basic human right, and it's not okay to be putting the blame over on us as an entire community. It is not traveller culture not to get an education. And we have to stop with that. That is a poverty of expectation that is there. So for me, that's why reflective practice is very important, because we all have a role to play, whether we be traveller or non-traveller. It takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I was trying to be neuroaffirmative this evening by not going for the full 2 hours. So what I'm going to do, unless it's something you really want to add, either of you, is I might move over to some of the questions with an aim to finishing in the next kind of 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah, because 2 hours is a long time, especially for if somebody's neurodivergent or if they're experiencing any other challenges. So is there anything, will I go to the questions, or is there anything else you want to jump in on there?
It's actually homeschool liaison officer was the professionals that I forgot to mention, and they're phenomenal. And yeah, I'm so sorry about that, but they really are like a phenomenal resource for families, for the parents, the children, and the teachers. Yeah.
I think nobody could accuse you of not thanking everybody. Marie, I think you've thanked everybody. So I have comments here, I have questions here. So I'm just going to go to the first one. So I think this question is for you first, Padraig, and I think it might be from a parent. So I'm just going to say my child is struggling and doesn't want to go to school, and they're very anxious and very upset in the morning. Some people have said that I should force them to go because education is really important. But as a parent, my gut is telling me I'm doing the wrong thing. What should I do?
Well, I'd say your gut is screaming at you for a reason, so listen to it. And be really curious what's going on for your child. Be really curious with the teachers, what's happening with them. If they're really highly anxious, I think it would be exploring that, what's going on for them, but being really curious. We can often dismiss young people's emotions by saying you'll be grand and keep going you'll be all right, sure, look, come on, everyone has to go to school. I think sit, hold silence and ask questions and start figuring out that. I see this time and time again. I'm not quick to pull a child from school because they can gain so much from it. But there are moments where we're like, today isn't the day. This week mightn't be the week. They just need connection. They need to feel safe. They need to get rest. But it's trusting your gut as a parent. And we have a lot of societal pressures that we should achieve many things, and this is how things should be. We are a family, and the core should be caring for our children, and whatever they need and want, listen to your gut. But stay curious. Inquire with the school, building those relationships with the teachers, what's happening for them, what's happening with our child as well. Having space to open those conversations, I think, is really powerful. And
Thanks, Padraig.
just a side note,
Yeah.
it's everything that I'm going to say is general information without holding everything, the whole backstory. It's very difficult for me to give you clinical interventions. Just to note that this is just on those few sentences. I can give you some thoughts and reflections, but they're not clinical recommendations or evidence. I think if you are really worried about your child, seek professional support as well.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, no, there's other bits I didn't read out in the message that this person has linked in with other services as well, and I think it's just maybe pressure on the education side, and I think that that's something as parents often, you kind of do know your own child, and so one of your children might want to pull a fast one and not go to school, and you know it, and you say, listen, get out the door and go. But then there are times where in your heart and soul there's something a little bit different here. And and I have seen sometimes people who perhaps didn't get to achieve what they wanted to achieve in education because of their own the barriers that they experience, often are afraid that that pattern will repeat, and they feel under an awful lot of pressure to get their child out the door to school, even if it feels like it's the wrong thing. And I also sometimes see as well where people are parenting alone. There's an awful lot of pressure to get it right, because if there's two of you there, and the child says they don't want to go to school, you don't feel like all the spotlight is on you, and I'm here and I'm on my own and I'm parenting on my own and everyone's going to think I'm a terrible parent. You can kind of spread it out a bit if there's more of you in the house. So there are all of those different pressures and factors, but thanks a million for that. I'm going to read out a comment and then I'm going to come to another question. My undergraduate psychology dissertation looked at the impact of providing free sanitary products in a DEIS primary school, and it goes without saying that the results were for the young girls. We had new child protection training, and I mentioned this, and they hadn't heard of period poverty. We have so much work to go as a society to help the girls have an equal opportunity to school. Menstruation is starting at a younger age, than ever before, and the awareness in primary school somehow isn't there. Yeah. So they're very good points. Like, if you're somebody who's lucky enough not to be struggling for money, it can be very difficult to really understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of a house where there is none. And there are children who will be invited to birthday parties and the parents will say, oh, we can't go. And it's because they don't have 10 euros to put on a card. There are families who do not have 5 euros to pay for sanitary towels. And sanitary products are expensive. So it is great. I know they've said here that in their local university, MTU, that they provide free menstrual hygiene products. I know that it's same at least in the bathrooms where I use in the psychology department, there's free products there. I'd be curious if that's happening in secondary schools and in primary schools.
So it is happening. Yeah, so I know a lady was telling me about this last week. So it is happening here in one of the local primary schools. And she was saying to me that what the parents did was they created like a little basket in the primary school for the girls. And like obviously the first couple of times the baskets went out, now kids being kids, and we were all the same. But I thought it was very thoughtful. So what they did, they actually included as well is clean underwear for the little girls, and they have their sanitary towels and as well wipes and a little note to say, if this happens. And so the kids also have a note in their that they can bring home, let's say if ma'am isn't at home. Now that's very gendered, to be honest with you. And I think as well, like, with schools, we have a tendency to contact ma'am first instead of dad. I know we were speaking about the lone parenting, but like there are two parents involved in this. So it's those kind of little things. So that is happening like at a primary school level, and there was a lot of thought put into it. So I thought that was lovely. Yeah.
Thanks a million, Marie. And there's another question there now, and it is: a child who's in school, in primary school. I want to say that this is maybe from a teacher, and they suspect that the child is the child is actually living in homelessness accommodation, but the child has not said that, nor has the parent. Is this common?
Yeah. So it would be, and I suppose an awful lot of people wouldn't realize that we have a form of hidden homelessness, but we also have a lot of families staying in hotels, B&Bs and things like that. So there would be a lot of stigma and shame around that. Um, where I do think it's a good idea for the parents to let the school know, let the teacher know, because if the teacher knows, they can support the child better. Yeah, it is very common. Our homeless emergency statistics are gone through the roof for children. I think we're over 5,000 now. Children living in emergency homeless accommodation. So what that would looks like is it looks like hotels, it looks like family hubs. It might be a B&B. It's not what we would have considered to be traditional homelessness. So it can be something that is maybe a bit easy to miss or not as obvious as what it would have been years ago. But I suppose like that again, if with the teacher, it's been able to build that relationship of trust maybe with ma'am that she could disclose that to you or confide in you. But it would be an important thing definitely to know. It's very common. A lot in our line of work, it's very common because that's what we work with. Do you know?
Mm.
So it's different if you're not working directly in the front line, but it's a lot more common than what it would have been a few years ago.
Thanks. Sorry, I have the wrong glasses on, so sometimes I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling too fast and I don't even realize it. So there's another question here, and it says, I'm just going to read it first. Okay. So there's the challenges in terms of the issues that children are bringing to primary school and secondary school is that parents are increasingly also having to deal with parents who are very dysregulated. And are there, what kind of strategies can schools put in place to help support teachers and or those parents? Project, you look like you want to come in there.
They're talking about strategies to support what can schools do to support parents to become regulated? Is that the
I think
question?
I think it's both. It's about how do you support the teachers who are having to deal with some of this, and some of it
Yeah.
sounds, so there's stuff there. It's about, actually it's quite abusive, some of the stuff.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I can imagine. And I suppose when you're working with families and they are undergoing huge levels of stress themselves, often they can come through the door of the clinic and they can be really dysregulated. And I suppose it's a tricky conversation to have. First and foremost, it is minding ourselves, no matter what environment we're in. And when we're working with people, we will experience aggression, we will experience this vicarious trauma ourselves when we're working closely with it. So, what we have in our tank is, have we taken care of our own foundations? Are we seeking our peer support? Are we seeking counsel for ourselves with our principal? What does that look like? So, I'd say starting with that point, it's very difficult as a teacher, I can imagine, to ask a parent, are you doing what you need to regulate your own emotions before you come in here? It's a very tricky conversation to have, but I think it's what's in your power in that space, and it's just taking care of yourself. I'm in a different position where when a parent comes through the door, we are speaking about their ability to regulate their own emotion so that they are in a better position to take care. But that is my position as an occupational therapist. I don't mind having those challenging conversations, but it's very tricky as a teacher. So it's just minding that space for you. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, and I don't think there's a straight answer there, but
Thanks, Patrick. And I think there's
mm,
something around, and there's a lot of people talking about trauma-informed services, and I guess that's a whole other session on whether that people are doing it or not. But something around that, you said about often a lot of aggression comes from a place of frustration, and frustration often comes from a place of despair. So if when we work back at it, but it can be very hard when somebody is shouting to be able to see that. Um, but perhaps, and I know there are a number of schools who are attempting to become trauma sensitive schools, and it's about that, about understanding what it is that might be going on for that parent. I won't name any schools, but there is a school in Limerick. I know that they've been amazing in terms of the work that they've been doing with parents. And there are other schools. It's just that's what is in my head today. And it is a primary school, and they've been doing evening classes in that primary school for the parents of those children. And it is everything from, yoga, cooking, and then, once they get them in the door, then it's moving into that stuff that we're talking about, relationships and regulation, etc. I'm very conscious of the time, and I just want to thank our panelists so much. We've gotten loads of comments in there about people, learning, or people who appreciated hearing, something that perhaps was their own experience, for example, and having that validated. So I really, really want to thank you for giving up time on a January evening. It can be hard. And again, I want to thank everybody who turned up as well. And I want to thank Yadra and all of the staff in the Psychological Society of Ireland for all of the amazing work that they do in the background to allow us to have these events. And please do keep an eye on the PSI social media pages, if because there will be other events coming up during the year that you may be interested in. Pádraig has an Instagram page. It's called the OT Coach, and Pádraig has a podcast as well. So you'll see those things. And Marie is on social, but she doesn't want you to follow her on social media because that's where she does a lot of giving out. But I enjoy following and Marie giving out. So if you enjoy that, that's the place to go. So look, thanks again, everybody, and wishing you all the very best for the year ahead in what indeed is a very turbulent global national situation. So it's very important now that we gently go into 2026 and that we mind ourselves and each other. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Slán.